1. New York Times rushes Mamdani college application story to beat Christopher Rufo. 2. Zohran Mamdani's SAT score and Columbia race controversy revealed. 3. Zohran Mamdani's NYC mayoral bid, New York Times controversy explained. 1. New York Times rushes Mamdani college application story to beat Christopher Rufo. Breaking. The New York Times didn't simply decide to publish Zohran Mamdani's old Columbia University application out of journalistic curiosity. It moved fast because it feared someone else, namely conservative activist Christopher Rufo, would beat it to the punch. That sense of urgency is the headline revelation from a news semaphore report, which cites two people familiar with the Times' internal deliberations. According to those insiders, editors at the Gray Lady learned that Rufo and perhaps other reporters were preparing their own stories about Mamdani's 2009 college paperwork, so the Times hit publish before anyone else could claim the scoop. But here's where it gets controversial. The paper still insists timing had nothing to do with rivals and everything to do with confirming facts. Let's unpack what happened, step by step, and why it matters. 1. How the document surfaced, and why it was sensitive. In late June, Columbia University suffered a cyberattack. Among the cache of stolen files was Mamdani's admissions application. The breach exposed personal and demographic details, including how the future New York City mayoral hopeful identified his race. He checked both Asian and Black or African American. Because his family heritage is Indian-Ugandan and he was born in Uganda, Mamdani later explained he chose multiple boxes to reflect the fullness of his background. For many applicants with complex roots, this kind of double-checking is not unusual, but it can spark fierce debates about identity and affirmative action. 2. The Times gets the lead, and the pressure. Once the stolen document started circulating, Times reporters obtained a copy and, in keeping with standard practice, asked Mamdani to verify it. He did. That alone made the story newsworthy, editors say, especially since he is a prominent progressive candidate who has called himself an American who was born in Africa. Yet, according to Semaphore, the Times also knew Christopher Rufo, best known for his crusades against critical race theory, was digging into the same material. The specter of being scooped accelerated the newsroom's timeline. A senior Times journalist, speaking anonymously, later told Semaphore the uproar proved the piece was legit reporting. And this is the part most people miss. The Times officially denies racing the clock. A spokesperson told Fox News Digital that the paper publishes only when facts are nailed down, not when competitors loom. Still, insider accounts paint a different, more urgent picture. 3. Liberal backlash erupts, from inside and outside the Times. The article landed with a thud among many progressives. Jamel Bouie, one of the Times' own opinion columnists, lambasted reporter Benjamin Ryan in a since-deleted Blue Sky post, calling him a person of little to no actual brain activity. Bouie later removed the insults, admitting they violated internal social media rules. His reaction mirrored a broader progressive critique, that highlighting Mamdani's racial checkboxes amounted to sensationalism or worse, a dog whistle about affirmative action fraud. 4. The Standard's desk defends the decision. Patrick Healy, the assistant managing editor for Standards and Trust, issued a public note on X, formerly Twitter. Healy emphasized that while the document originated in a cyberhack, the Times did not rely solely on hacked material. The newsroom confirmed authenticity with Mamdani himself. In other words, they argue, the sourcing crossed the ethical bar. 5. Rufo tips his hat, and moves on. Meanwhile, Rufo congratulated the Times reporters for publishing, a rare moment of praise across the ideological divide. Whether he'll still release his own version of the story remains to be seen, but the Times' preemptive strike clearly shaped the media narrative. Why does any of this matter? It illustrates the high-stakes race for scoops in modern journalism, where even elite outlets feel competitive pressure. It reignites debates over how newsrooms should handle hacked or leaked material, especially when it concerns private educational records. It raises tricky questions about multiracial identity on college applications and whether checking multiple boxes is misleading, perfectly reasonable, or somewhere in between. Thought-provoking questions for you. 1. Should major newspapers ever publish information that originates from a cyber attack if the subject later confirms it? Or does the initial hack taint the material beyond redemption? 2. Was the Times right to rush its report once it suspected Rufo was on the same trail, or does that contradict its claim of unhurried, methodical journalism? 3. Finally, do you think applicants like Mamdani fairly represent themselves by selecting more than one racial category, or does this practice exploit admissions policies designed for historically marginalized groups? Jump into the comments, agree, disagree, or offer a completely different angle. The debate over identity, ethics, and the media's competitive instincts is only getting started. 2. Zohran Mamdani's SAT score and Columbia race controversy revealed. Imagine the shockwaves that rippled through the political landscape when Zohran Mamdani's SAT scores were made public. The revelation came on the heels of a bombshell. The Democratic nominee for New York City mayor had listed himself as African American on his application to Columbia University. This disclosure sparked a firestorm of criticism and debate, with many questioning the authenticity of his self-identification. But here's where it gets controversial. Mamdani's SAT score of 2,140 out of 2,400, while not exceptional, was likely above the median score for black students at the time, according to independent journalist Christopher Rufo. This score falls within the middle 50% range for admitted students, which was between 2,110 and 2,300 on the math, critical reading, and writing sections of the SAT, as highlighted in a 2009 post on Columbia's website. The Ugandan-born Mamdani faced intense scrutiny after it was revealed that he had checked both Asian and Black/African American on his application. Critics argued that Columbia's affirmative action policies, which were in place when Mamdani applied in 2009, might have influenced his decision to identify as black to gain preferential treatment. Mamdani, now 33 and serving as a Queens Assemblyman, clarified his stance to the New York Times, stating that while he doesn't consider himself African American, he identifies as an American who was born in Africa. He explained that the application didn't offer a category that fully captured his identity. The New York Times report, which broke the story, was based on hacked documents shared with the newspaper. Mayor Eric Adams, Mamdani's opponent in the November general election, was quick to condemn the decision. The African American identity is not a checkbox of convenience. It's a history, a struggle, and a lived experience. For someone to exploit that for personal gain is deeply offensive, Adams stated. Mamdani was ultimately rejected from Columbia and instead attended Bowdoin College in Maine. The Mamdani campaign has yet to respond to requests for comment. And this is the part most people miss. The debate surrounding Mamdani's application raises profound questions about identity, affirmative action, and the complexities of self-identification in higher education. Should individuals be allowed to self-identify in ways that might confer advantages in the admissions process? Or does this practice undermine the integrity of affirmative action policies? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Does Mamdani's case highlight the need for more nuanced categories in college applications, or does it underscore the importance of transparency and authenticity in the admissions process? 3. Zohran Mamdani's NYC mayoral bid, New York Times controversy explained. Is the New York Times trying to sabotage Zohran Mamdani's mayoral campaign? A recent article published by the New York Times has ignited a firestorm of controversy among readers, and for a very understandable reason. The piece, titled Mamdani Identified as Asian and African American on College Application, focuses on Zohran Mamdani, a candidate for New York City mayor who recently captured national attention with his surprising victory in the Democratic primary election. But here's where it gets controversial. The crux of the article revolves around Mamdani's college application to Columbia University. As a high school senior in New York City, Mamdani, who was born in Uganda and is of Indian descent, selected multiple boxes related to race. You might be wondering, what's the big deal, or why is this even considered news? These are excellent questions that deserve thoughtful answers. Regardless of its actual news value, or the lack thereof, the story undeniably caught the attention of one of Mamdani's political rivals, incumbent New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who is running as an independent candidate in the general election. Adams, who identifies as black, deemed it deeply offensive that Mamdani would attempt to exploit an African American identity when he is not, in fact, black. On Fox News, talk show hosts seized the opportunity to criticize Mamdani. For instance, Charlie Hurt, on Fox and Friends, labeled the mayoral candidate a racist and asserted that Mamdani despises America and everything it stands for. The right-wing cable network had already been targeting Mamdani, a Muslim and social democrat, even before the Times article surfaced. Former President Trump had previously labeled him a communist and suggested he should be deported. Other conservative media outlets also picked up the story, framing it as a diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) scandal, implying that Mamdani misrepresented his race to gain an advantage through affirmative action in Columbia's admission process. Ironically, Mamdani was not admitted to Columbia, which makes the scandal even more absurd. In print, the supposed scandal was further sensationalized by headline writers with phrases like, "Mamdani faces scrutiny over college application." Mamdani has provided an explanation for his actions, stating that he was attempting to convey his complex background. His father is of Indian-Ugandan descent, while his mother is Indian-American. Mamdani himself was born in Uganda, lived briefly in South Africa, and then moved to New York City as a child. He explained to the Times, "Most college applications don't have a box for Indian Ugandans, so I checked multiple boxes trying to capture the fullness of my background." The Times' decision to pursue and publish this story appears, at the very least, unwise. The information was obtained through a widespread hack into Columbia University's databases and was provided to the newspaper by an intermediary who was granted anonymity. This source has been identified as Jordan Lasker, a well-known and frequently criticized individual associated with eugenics, also known as a white supremacist. Traditional journalistic ethics dictate that when news organizations rely on hacked or stolen information, there should be an exceptionally high standard of newsworthiness to justify its publication. In contrast, many major news outlets declined to use insider documents provided to them about J.D. Vance during last year's presidential campaign, partly because the source was Iranian hackers. In some instances, they reported on the hacking incident but not the contents of the documents. However, the Mamdani story clearly did not meet this elevated newsworthiness standard. Patrick Healy, a senior editor at The Times, addressed the criticism of the story in a thread on X, formerly Twitter, defending it as part of the paper's mission to help readers better know and understand top candidates for major offices. Prominent media entrepreneur and journalist Soledad O'Brien, who is of mixed-race ancestry and identifies as black, dismissed Healy's explanation as a joke. She characterized the publication of the Mamdani story as an absolute embarrassment for the Times. Many others shared her sentiment, viewing Healy's explanation not as an admirable display of transparency but as a desperate attempt at damage control. This incident brings to light a larger issue, the Times' perceived opposition to Mamdani's candidacy. On the opinion side of the paper, this opposition is quite evident. Although the Times no longer endorses candidates for mayor, they published an editorial advising voters not to rank Mamdani at all on their ballots due to his alleged lack of qualifications. New York City employs ranked choice voting, which allows voters to list multiple candidates in order of preference. Remarkably, the Times did not offer the same "don't rank him" advice regarding disgraced former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who resigned in 2021 and subsequently ran against Mamdani in the primary. While the opinion section of the Times is entitled to its viewpoints, however misguided they may seem, straight news articles are expected to maintain neutrality and avoid taking sides in political races. They should be impartial and nonpartisan, refraining from promoting one candidate or undermining another. And this is the part most people miss. In reality, this is often not the case. With this fabricated scandal, coupled with the pre-election editorial, the Times appears to be on a mission to undermine Mamdani's campaign. No lofty explanation of their mission can conceal this fact. What are your thoughts? Do you believe the New York Times is intentionally trying to damage Zohran Mamdani's mayoral bid? Or is there a legitimate reason behind their coverage? Share your opinions and let's discuss this controversial issue, ***.